Hi, I'm State Senator Guy Gazzoni from Howard County, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, your weekly dive into the policies and personalities driving local government in Maryland.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. I'm your host, Chantel Malcolm Lim. I know, it's been a while since you've heard from me, but I'm here. I'm the communications coordinator for MACo, as well as the producer for this podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with Michael Sanderson to give you something a little different. We're bringing you a live conversation recorded at the 2025 MACo Winter Conference. So a little bit of context here. This was a session that just covered one of the biggest issues counties are grappling with right now, school construction. Of course, we have rising costs, aging buildings, and a growing backlog of unfunded projects that are putting real pressure on local govs across Maryland. Am I right, Michael, or am I right?
Absolutely right. Nailed it. So we have been taking a different tack at our conferences lately, and for the last few rounds, we've been doing one session where we bring in a guest to dig into a topic that everybody cares about and try and go a little deeper than you can get with the sort of 3 or 4 speakers on a panel over the course of 1 hour. So this session, we talked with Alex Donahue. He's the director of the IAC, the state education agency that governs school construction, but had him sit down at the front of the room with kind of a packed house in a ballroom setting. And I got to sort of pick through a bunch of different things and go a little deeper than the vanilla presentation allows. So we had a really good conversation with Alex. I would say if you're interested in school construction, he did a really good job illustrating buying power as the most important metric in measuring our investment in school construction. And you can look and say, well, we're doing $350 million or $450 million in the capital budget. That sounds pretty good. That's more than we were doing 10 or 20 years ago. But in terms of buying power, we're really not keeping up, and the state isn't able to get through the list of eligible projects. He makes that case really clearly in this conversation. And I think all the stuff we got to is pretty good content for our podcast listeners.
I think so too. And, with that, let's dive right into it. Enjoy the session from our 2025 Winter Conference.
Thanks, everyone, for joining for this next session. I like to try something a little bit different. Every conference is good. We've got an hour. We'll invite 3 or 4 speakers. They'll each speak for their little 8 or 10 minutes, and then we'll leave a little window at the end for questions. And we do plenty of that. If that's your brand, then you get plenty of that at the MACo conferences. But for a few cycles now, we've been trying to let's dig in on a topic with one guest and try and go a few layers deeper on the onion. Pick something that we're invested in, that's hot, that's interesting right at the moment. So I think we've got a winner, and judging by the audience this morning, we've read the room correctly. School construction and our school facilities is a priority across the state. Whether you're rapidly growing, whether you're facing old stock that needs reinvigoration, and the dollars in and around school construction are a priority for our counties. Our legislative committee made that one of MACo's legislative priorities for the coming year. It's a top issue facing counties. And as President Jack Wilson and I traveled around each jurisdiction, we heard a lot about school construction, as well as another list of obvious topics. So joining me on stage this morning is Alex Donahue. He's the director of the IAC, the Interagency Commission on School Construction. And we're going to have a one-to-one Q&A conversation. I'm going to be your audience proxy and ask some questions and try and guide a conversation, but draw from Alex some insights about where we are in this mission that we all share. So Alex, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Michael.
Appreciate it. All right, so probably good to do a 101. Most folks in the audience, whether you're inside county government or you live in Maryland and are a stakeholder in the success of our school systems, You're familiar with school construction generally, but give us like a little nuts and bolts about your role as director, your professional staff at the IAC, and then the board itself. So give us sort of the 101 on how that works.
Sure, Michael, and good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you all here today to talk about school construction, which really is more than just construction. It's school facilities portfolio management. And the IAC is the state's agency that is tasked with technical assistance to school districts and counties around all aspects of facilities portfolio management, from planning through design to construction to operations and maintenance, and eventually the end of lifespan of a building decommissioning. And the IAC works to not only collect data on what the needs are to communicate to policymakers we do this through assessments, about 500 site visits to public school facilities per year, every year, as well as advising through our staff, which includes architects, engineers, and capital projects experts, to help school districts and counties find the best ways forward to maintain, operate, renew their portfolios of school facilities, and balance the supply and demand for seats in the public schools out there. We work to be the locus of a partnership that's really a three-party partnership between school districts, counties, and the state. And not just for funding, but for problem solving. It's really about bring us your problems so that we can work together on finding solutions, including solutions that are outside the box, right? The traditional approaches. I'll give an example. Some school districts came to the IAC over the last couple of years and said, we'd like to expand our pre-K offerings, but we don't have space everywhere to do that. And there's not sites available to create new space. We might need to lease space, but the state had not historically invested in leased facilities with state capital dollars. So the IAC looked at it, figured out a way to fund improvements to leased facilities if they meet certain criteria, so that we could help those districts that could not find any additional sites to purchase and build out. So that's an example of, you bring a problem, say we need to think outside the box. We'll work with you on that. Always open to it. Michael, you asked about staff and the board responsibilities. So the IC has a staff of about 40 people divided into multiple teams, assessment, technical assistance, funding programs. And then there's the Commission of 9. It's an independent state agency, which means we don't report directly to the governor as an executive branch, like a department. But instead, our Commission of 9 members makes the decisions around where state capital dollars are allocated and what the state school construction policies should be, and evaluate what the needs are and how to make the recommendations and the requests to the leadership for what's needed to support counties and school districts around their school facilities.
So when you talk about problem solving as part of the mission, my sense is you and your team end up building real bonds with our smaller jurisdictions who may not go as deep with locally placed technical staff. The largest jurisdictions sort of have a cycle for big improvements and new facilities. You're a small jurisdiction, you may only build a new school once a decade or so. You have needs that come up, but you don't necessarily have all those technical people on staff every year all the time, and you help fill in those gaps, right?
Absolutely. So when a school district, small or large, is grappling with an issue, we offer to bring in best practices from the other districts around the state that have had success handling that sort of issue or need. And we bring in best practices from national support organizations like the National Council on School Facilities, of which we're a member. And we also can tap into other state agencies that have expertise. Right? Maryland Energy Administration is one great partner who have been really devoting serious staff effort and capacity to helping our school districts. And what the IC has done is taken MEA's grant opportunities for schools and figured out how can we help our school districts combine funding streams for any available resources that their projects are eligible for from the federal level with direct pay reimbursements for energy efficiency improvements or net zero, MEAs, state grants for similar improvements to school facilities, whether new or existing, and the IAC's traditional CIP and other funding programs.
So there's a natural connection between investments at the facility level and then the later operational costs of those facilities. So sometimes the idea of making a facility energy efficient at the time of the build out or the big renovation is an opportunity to save on the back end. We're all struggling with operational costs. We are in the middle of the rollout of the 10-year blueprint. We have high aspirations for education outcomes. And by having the buildings in good shape and take fewer sort of dollars and resources moment to moment, that frees up resources for the other core missions. Fair enough?
Absolutely. The purpose of school facilities is to support the teaching and learning that needs to happen, and programs and services to serve the students in the communities and the communities with their broader set of activities. And so what we want to do is we want to achieve school buildings that are educationally sufficient for every single student in the state and are fiscally sustainable over the long haul. And we know that if we don't achieve fiscal sustainability, we cannot preserve educational sufficiency. It just won't happen.
So these goals are connected. You need to have appropriate places for the good things to happen in the schools and to get the outcomes we want. So we're all stakeholders on that mission. I think, so let's try and bring this into more focus why right now this is maybe even a higher priority than it has been. Tell us about the state of affairs with projects that are being submitted locally. They come to the IAC for review. You all do a categorization process and so forth. And then the state ends up finding the resources to say, let's go ahead with this project. And we've got the funding to make it happen. Where are we on that trouble? And if you were here for the last session where we had like troubling trends was the opening session, right? You're still in the same room and we still have some troubling trends. So let's talk through that.
Sure. The state of school construction and school facilities portfolio management around the state is increasingly stressed. And there are a number of reasons for that, but one, in terms of rock and a hard place kind of factors, is the cost of school construction has increased so much, literally 200% in the last 20 years. 200%.
Right.
Versus the consumer price index, the general economy, only about 80% up. So that means that the costs of renewing school facilities is more than doubled compared to the resources over what it had been. And that means the purchasing power of school districts and counties and the state's capital budget has been cut probably in half. And so we're all able to do fewer projects than we used to against the need. And the backlog of the deferred maintenance, the deferred capital renewal, has just been growing and growing, right? So now we have economic challenges in the larger context, and it is really, really tough. We've been hearing from school districts that they have exhausted as the one-time measures available to them to pull off funding their top priority projects, and they're now struggling to meet the cash flow requirements of just the number one, number two priority projects, right? And the IAC's appropriations, aside from the Built to Learn Act boost of funding over the last 4 or 5 years, which is mostly exhausted, we've awarded 95% of those dollars to projects, is now tapering back down to the baseline it had been at before, and it's not enough.
So we tried to do some number crunching. The inflation in costs for building schools. So let's say that again, 20-year window, and the general cost, like we know prices tend to rise. There's CPI, general judgment about a market basket of things that we all consume. And over that window of the 20 years, we've seen School construction up by, sorry, say
200%.
up 200%. So prices have tripled compared to
20 years ago, right?
So
So about less than doubled on the standard economy, the breadbasket.
Right.
So if tax revenues and capital budgets are tied to the general economy, folks' incomes, right, then that means school construction and school facilities costs over the long term have gone up twice as much.
I feel like as a longtime stakeholder in school construction, I feel like Maryland had a level set moment in right around 20 years ago with the COP Commission. Nancy Kopp was the state treasurer at the time, and a whole series of state and local leaders and your predecessors and colleagues and as the technical staff sort of put a lot of effort into a series of recommendations on what Maryland needed to do to keep pace with school construction. And my recollection from back then was $250 million a year was sort of the guiding light. And to their credit, the General Assembly bought in. And for years and years, it was, we need to step up and do 250. That was in 2006. So that's about the window you're talking about for the rising in price. $250 million to the COP Commission is $700 or $800 million today, and the state hasn't been able to come up with that. I mean, long and short of it, there's a political process here too.
Right.
The state contribution is more in nominal dollars, but we're not doing as many square feet as we used to. Long and the short of it, right?
That's right. And the legislative target for the IAC's funding programs, all told, was raised to $400 million and then to $450 in the last 2 or 3 years. But the IAC's calculated that in order to fully fund the baseline target allocation for every county in this fiscal 27 cycle and complete funding of the highest priority projects that are in progress now, their cash flow needs for the year, we need about 620 minimum, just the top priority projects, just the ones, not saying starting a lot of new projects, just getting the ones that are underway now or in design to be completed soon over the finish line. The 450 isn't going to do it. 620 is the very, very minimum that we've let the governor and the General Assembly know that's what we would need.
And capital dollars are different. We know that if you've been reading headlines and you follow the political and policy climate in Maryland, the state budget's going to be in a squeeze. And this coming budget cycle, there's going to be not a lot of cash to go around. But for the most part, the investment in capital school construction comes through the state issuing bonds, and it's a long-term payment rather than cash today. So I guess the relative good news here is to try and find the resources that we think we need right now doesn't necessarily have to be a competitor in the cash sweepstakes, which is going to be a really tough engine for this legislative session. So this is mostly about to what extent is the state able to make bonding commitments, pay over the long haul for projects that we need today to keep up. That fair enough? Mm-hmm. Right. And we've used pay as you go as opposed to bond. We've used cash for capital projects sometimes in the past, and sometimes that's a effective way to, when you have a sort of bump up in the economy, you say, hey, we don't have to borrow for some of these things. We'll do it in cash. Can't beat 0%, right? But as a practical matter, we're not going to be in that environment right away or anytime soon. So that's part of this discussion. I recall hearing compelling numbers. I've been in the room hearing you present before about the wave of schools that get classified as A and B and so forth. And I know you have a tiering process for when the school is really old or when the growth really merits an expansion or a new building and so forth. How does that square up with your $620 million figure? Are we even getting to the A's and B's with that, or is that just keeping pace with the top tier?
So no, that would only be keeping pace with the top tier. And so what we've gotten this fall in the CIP requests from the school districts is 160 requests, project funding requests total, about $750 million worth of requests for state. That's the state share portion of the project. So obviously the value is much larger. Right. And if we're expecting about 380 in the appropriation, because out of the 450, 380 goes to the CIP and the enrollment growth and relocatables program, and the balance to other programs, then we will be looking at having about half of the appropriations we need compared to the request level. So that means that some of the requests, after we evaluate them for eligibility, can be funded and will be A status and are going to be found eligible but not fundable with the 380. And so they'll be B status, and they will be essentially queued up for hopefully next year, eligibility next year. Or if we get additional funding, we're fortunate, then we will convert some of those more of those Bs to As and fund them. We push out the door every year, every dollar we can get our hands on. There is no sitting on any money. In fact, we have made it very clear to school districts and counties that if you have eligibility for state dollars, we need you to take them now while we have them for you. Otherwise, they will go to another high priority project in another county if you don't have the local matchers, the project's not ready to move forward. We cannot let dollars sit on the shelf, because every year they sit on the shelf, they lose probably 5% of the value just to inflation. And that's not affordable. So we will use every single dollar.
So I want to connect back to one of your earlier examples about pre-K and leased facilities, but it does strike me that among the operational missions in the blueprint is for Maryland to expand offerings for 3 and 4-year-olds and try and do this in tiers and so forth. But this has been an element of the blueprint that's been tough to get off the ground, in no small part because private providers haven't switched from daycare to full instruction at the numbers that I think the Kerwin Commission originally envisioned. So that's probably an extra layer of pressure for, we don't have physical space to offer public pre-K for the number of kids that in the blueprint we're supposed to in this county or that county. Is that one more element that's making this just a little more, not that it's not hard enough with cost inflation like you've talked about and the political will not keeping up with that necessarily, but pre-K's got to be another element in this soup, right?
Michael, it absolutely is, in part because there's so much uncertainty around pre-K expansion for a couple of reasons. And second, because there was no dedicated funding established at the state level for it. And so a few districts are adding new space to expand their pre-K offerings right now, and the IAC is supporting those projects. But at this point, not a huge amount of new space. And that's probably the right way to proceed, considering the uncertainty about the uptake by families of any new services capacity and seats, and the uncertainty about the availability of additional teachers and staff to teach the additional classes and the affordability of all of that. So funding for those projects will have to come out of the CIP. And so in a sense, those do compete with replacing a roof that's leaking and replacing an HVAC system that's hit the end of its lifespan. And the inflation is pressuring all of that. The IAC is supporting well-founded requests for state participation in new pre-K space, and we'll continue to do that to the extent that we have funding to do it. But we also know that school districts have to keep their existing facilities in good condition and functioning and doors open. And so we've got to prioritize those projects. And even though pre-K is, an initiative that is state level, we have to balance all of those competing needs.
All right. So one more mouth to feed in a nest where the worms are in short supply. Tortured analogy, but work with me here.
You could tweet that.
Right. I see what it did there. So I know historically we've had, you sort of alluded to counties in different circumstances where the local schools and the counties, sometimes their ability to commit their match to a project is an element in whether we're ready to go. And sometimes this one's going to stay on the B list because the wherewithal isn't there locally or the capacity, whatnot. It strikes me that another element in school construction, which used to be a rarity, and I think the pressures are so high. I mean, collectively, if the state's going to do 400 and the right number is 600 and change or 7 or 8, you end up with jurisdictions saying, we can't wait for the state. And so increasing pressure on local jurisdictions to forward fund a project, say, we're going to go ahead, we'll float the bonds and we'll commit that this project will get paid for. And that might be a new school and $200 million in anticipation that in due course through the state process, eventually this will get the state funding that ought to come to it. We wish it come today, but we can't wait 3 more years for the bricks and mortar. So can you, from the IAC's perspective and sort of the state local relationship, any thoughts or comments about that as an emerging trend? It's tough for a number of folks in this room.
Absolutely. Some counties have been doing temporary forward funding of the state share of a project for years. It's not a new concept by any means, but the number of counties that have been doing it in the recent years has definitely increased. And with a few counties who've never done it before having to step in and do that. And it's a really significant and consequential fiscal step for a county. It's not a small thing to do. This fall, the IAC submitted that estimate of needing 622 in partly in order to attempt to prevent some of the smaller counties from having to forward fund the cost of the big projects that they're faced with having to do. You just cannot avoid it, have to do it, have to borrow if you can't can't get enough of the state funding. So in this difficult budget climate, unfortunately, I don't know what the chances are of receiving the additional needed appropriations. Some counties may well be forced into, as you said, they can't wait, shouldn't wait. Right. Have just got to find a way to do that. But I've made the case for the funding needed to try to avoid as much of that as we can. And we'll continue to provide the data that the policymakers and the decision makers on the funding need to see the urgency of that need.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure everybody can think through, no matter the size of your jurisdiction, if you start to scale things down and think about our smaller jurisdictions, the counties with 20, 30, 40,000 residents, one new school that needs to be built and a $150 million price tag for a new middle school or whatever, in today's climate, having that rest on the books of a jurisdiction with that small of a tax base, that small a number of taxpayers, that's going to break all your metrics for the bond rating agencies and one that they're going to say, what are you doing? That looks like reckless spending. And for the most part, it's us responding to what's happening on the ground, and we're waiting for our partner to arrive. And it's an uncomfortable spot that a lot of folks, I think a political generation ago, would have said that's untenable for a small county, but it may be untenable to leave the kids in the overcrowded or dilapidated school buildings. And,
No, you're absolutely right, Michael. And what this is pointing out is that the counties cannot do it alone. And we've provided the information to the fiscal decision makers at the state level about what the need is, but the state can't do it alone either. So yesterday, I was on Capitol Hill meeting with some senators and representatives on what could a federal role to assist, particularly the lowest wealth, highest need counties nationally and in Maryland, with bridging that gap. And starting out with capacity building for the counties and school systems to grapple with these increasingly pressured, increasingly complex and difficult capital infrastructure challenges right? Everybody's facing these cost challenges, right? And as you said before, smaller school districts and counties don't have folks on staff necessarily. One person's doing three, four jobs. You got to get some assistance with that. And if the state is tapped out in the larger sense as well, then we're going to make the case for any assistance we can get as well from the federal level. So we're shaking every tree we possibly can. We're putting the data out there, making the case to everyone we possibly can. It's going to be up to the funders to step forward and complete the partnership around this for our communities.
So I think we're of like minds that there'll be a lot of support and encouragement from the county level that this is an area, despite shortfalls in cash in the moment, these are investments we can't delay on. So I think we'll have a presence at the local government level on that front, and it'll be a priority for our county leaders, many of whom are in the room this morning. Let me give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about one more thing. You've made mention of this a couple times. Frequently, you're a guest at the MACo Legislative Committee and talk with the representatives who kind of focus on Annapolis on behalf of their colleagues back home. But in this larger audience, I've heard you talk about a concept of total cost of ownership as a metric that partially under your leadership, but it's sort of been absorbed by the commission itself and you and your staff. This is getting back to the idea of investments in the facility as you build and rebuild, but then also ongoing and thinking of that start to finish as a life cycle. You even started off by correcting me. We're not just talking about school construction, but we're talking about the start to finish investment in that whole infrastructure. So can you maybe double click on that concept a little bit and bring some of our county folks who haven't heard that bit. So give us your song and dance there.
Sure. Thanks, Michael, for giving me that stage, because the concept is really to open up focus on the long term and how to get to fiscal sustainability. And total cost of ownership is essentially what is the total cost to own and operate the building over the lifespan, or at least what's more easily estimated as a 30-year time frame. And that's the first cost, upfront cost to design and build the facility, and then the operations and maintenance cost over the 30 years to keep it in good condition so that it's educationally sufficient and doesn't cost too much to own and operate. And that means doing the preventive maintenance investments ongoingly, and then replacing the building systems, most of which don't last a full 60 years of a reasonable facility lifespan. But some flooring could last 8-10 years, right? Some HVAC systems, 20 years, roof 25 years, et cetera, right? Those systems are going to wear out and need to be replaced along the way. So you got to factor those costs in. And of course, over time, the inflation's hitting those costs, right? So we want to look at the long-term costs, which on average are slightly higher than the first cost to build the facility. So when you construct a facility, everybody's thinking about, can we afford to build this new school or replace this school? That's less than half the cost that the district and county and the state together are on the hook for in the long run. And so these vary widely, right? Depending on the size of the building and the type and quality and the characteristics of the components in them. But the bottom line really here is that neither the counties nor the state now have or are likely to have enough money to cover all the long-term costs of all the facilities we now have. So we have to keep the total cost of ownership for every project in mind and keep it as low as we can while serving the needs of the students and the communities, because any overspending today is going to magnify the shortfalls in the long run.
So these, again, multiple pieces of the story connected, related to the total cost of ownership or operation. I'm interested in in sort of softening standards to some degree. Maybe that's not the right phrase, but a lot of us are familiar with ed specs as this is the old school, rigid standards. Every building needs to look this way, and the hallways need to be this width, and there need to be bathrooms with this frequency, and things like that. We still build an awful lot of schools that still look that way, more or less. But my sense is we've seen some more innovation in the way you can envision a proper place for school learning. I think Prince George's County has maybe been Maryland's leader on that front, but I don't think they're alone in looking at these models. How does the commission and your staff sort of work with sort of adjacent concepts to where we did things 25 years ago?
So I wanted to start out by making it clear that the IAC in the state does not create ed specs. School districts create ed specs. They're the documents that state what the requirements are to be able to serve the students that they need to serve in that facility, deliver the programs and services that need to be delivered. They are the requirements that the school districts use to communicate to the architects and the designers to get them to design what it is that will meet those needs, right? The IAC does not prescribe, and in fact, we would love to see the school districts not only continue but expand how they work as laboratories of innovation on this. And the IAC is very much open to thinking outside those traditional boxes, absolutely, so long as the long-term total cost of ownership is not higher, right? That it is cost efficient and cost effective, and a design obtains the results needed to serve the students, to deliver the programs and services. So there is ample flexibility there.
Okay, so a focus on the ends, not necessarily all the specific means to reach them, and the idea that there's more latitude in the state partnering on something that looks different than we might have done a full human generation or two ago is us like reacting to the times and making sense of it. So, I want to get to questions from our audience, but I think a good wrap up is, what did I not ask you about that you were ready to hit the home run answer on? What question did I miss that I should have? And go ahead and hit that home run.
Sure. Thank you. So what I'd like folks to take away today is that this is a three-party partnership, school districts, counties, and the state. And I would love to see every county school district come together with the state in the same room, with transparency about what it'll take to achieve the outcomes we need, and to communicate with communities about what it's going to take, as well as state leadership on the strategies that we need to be using together, the joint efforts that need to take place to bring to bear the needed resources, communicating with stakeholders around how can we implement those things. The IAC is really doing everything we possibly can within our capacity and our role. And what we've seen is when the counties and the school districts and the state come together in the same room, all of a sudden these legacy assumptions that really aren't true anymore maybe have been dispelled, and folks go, now we can see how to get progress, and we can start putting together the collaboration that's needed on that. It's worked. It really has it has pushed through some obstacles in a number of places where we've done that. I'd like to see that just really elevated and increased.
Okay, so I want to get to questions from the audience. I want to close with a quick observation. I've made mention already of the state's in a budget crisis. We'll hear more about that tomorrow morning. We'll have a General Assembly forecast, and you'll hear from legislative leaders and from the governor's office where fiscal issues are going to play a really major role. But two things that I think are worth knowing is, first, the capital budget is sort of a separate animal. It's not a cash balance issue that we would be encumbering if the state were to say this is the time to renew our investment in public schools and public school infrastructure. The second thing I can say on that front is we're a relatively cheap date in an election year where there's not a lot of money to spend, that making commitments to infrastructure doesn't put this year's budget out of whack. And there's going to be a lot of things that legislative leaders would like to do, but won't have the cash to do because of this year's budget. But this actually is not that circumstance. This might be an area where a state can make a commitment in a year of political sensitivities. We understand legislators want to run on accomplishments. This may be a thing. If we can collectively elevate the importance of school facilities as a message to Annapolis, this may be an opportunity to win in an environment where there's not going to be a lot of that happening on fiscal issues. So don't want to be too Pollyanna and optimistic, but there's a window that may not be obvious if you don't play this game. So with that, let's take some questions from the audience. We've got a little window of time, and let's hear from the expert back here.
Hi, thank you, Sarah Kogel-Smucker, Climate Change Officer for Montgomery County, and thank you for that overview. I was interested if you could just speak briefly to both the costs, but also fiscal opportunities from school decarbonization, because I know that the state has put a lot of thought into it, and I think it's part of the picture here.
Sure. Decarbonization is a long-term goal of the state leadership, and the IAC is working to support school districts and counties in making the right decisions project by project to maximize how much decarbonization they can fold into the regular process of school facilities portfolio management. It has to be integrated. It can't be a separate standalone activity. It will generate over time significant cost savings on the operations and maintenance side. It does take more money upfront, but not a huge amount of money upfront additional. And there are now funding streams available from the state and from the federal government right now that school districts can and are taking advantage of to cover part or all the costs, those upfront first costs to reach for net zero facilities or decarbonized or both. It is something that will bear fruit over the long run, and that can be multiplied based on how much we can bring to bear now to do on that. So it's already working as a partnership effort. It's just a real long window activity, 20 years.
Hi, Deb Young, Howard County. Yes, you've got that big smile on your face because you were so helpful to us, Alex, over this past summer, figuring out what Howard County's real maintenance cost could be for the coming years. So I have two questions. One for you, Michael, and thank you for focusing MACo on this critical issue. The first question is, I thought that the State Department of Education was the one who is in charge of coming up with what school districts had to put in their schools. That's what we've been told, and that we can't deviate from that much. And today I'm hearing you say, wait a minute, it's our school districts that can make those decisions, and there aren't these specific requirements at the State Department of Education. And then, Michael, if you could just expand a little bit on why we could get more money from the state legislature for these types of projects this year and why it won't hurt the budget, I would really appreciate that.
Sure. I'll quickly cover your point, Deb, on school design. The State Department of Education has guidelines, not standards, not requirements. The State Department of Education sets the requirements for programs, right? Graduation requirements, et cetera, what has to be offered, programs and services. But in terms of facilities, school districts have pretty wide latitude to determine how to meet those programmatic requirements and what to design into school facilities. Absolutely, there are guidelines, there are publications. MSDE's staff stands ready to assist. It's part of an Interagency Commission, so we work with them closely. But aside from very minimal facility sufficiency standards that the IAC's promulgated, which are for existing facilities, not for new designs, right? They're not what you would want to build in a new school. They're just what identifies where there's a deficiency in an existing school that needs some attention. School districts have a huge amount of latitude. And then on funding.
So I'll try and expand a little bit on what I'm thinking about fiscal issues and how this could come together. Let's just say that we collectively, the technical staff with the IAC, all the stakeholders in education and in county governments on behalf of our local communities are saying these school facilities are a top priority. Let's get a win this year. And let's say the state says, let's find an extra $400 million. We'll float bonds, another whole wave of bonds of some sort, okay? The way that would work is it's an addition to the state capital budget. The General Assembly can increase the capital budget beyond what the governor submits. It's different than the operating budget where there are pretty tight limits on what the legislature can do. Now, how would that look budgetarily? It basically means the state would have to make money for debt service. If you float bonds, you've got to pay them back. And that's a long-term proposition. So if these would be 15-year bonds, let's say, then over that window of 15 years, you'd be paying the bondholders back with their debt service, but that would be an annual installment much smaller than $400 up front. So as a practical matter, you might only incur $20 million in this year's budget for a $400 million win and have a big cycle of school construction. Now, I understand that's only 3, 4, 5 big projects, but still, those are the numbers we need to be doing. So as a political, practical matter, one more piece is, hey, we heard that Maryland lost its AAA bond rating. Aren't we borrowing money at an exorbitant interest rate now? Not all that bad. It's difficult to isolate how much the effect of Moody's, one rating agency, moving Maryland just barely over the line from AAA, the top tier, to like the top edge of the tier right below it. We're still AA+. We're still a highly regarded investment quality, good investment. So our interest rates might be a smidge higher, but overall market force is a much bigger factor than just one rating agency's change. So that's kind of what the game plan might look like in dollars and cents.
Michael, let me just tack on real quick to that. This fall, the state's Capital Debt Affordability Committee, which looks at how much the state should bond and borrow, reaffirmed the state's target or the recommended target of $1.75 billion in borrowing. But they also noted that the state had not been actually borrowing that full amount recently. So what I don't know is, on the debt service side, what's the headroom that's available? Those things are not the IAC's purview, so I don't know. But what I can tell you is any additional borrowed funds through bonding, the IAC can pump out the door immediately. Within the fiscal year, any dollars we're given from whatever source, whether it's cash, obviously extremely unlikely, or additional bonding, we will get out to the highest priority projects all across the state pretty much immediately.
Hi there, Joseph Glula, Montgomery County. So our school district faces a large backlog of critical repairs, and it's a growing one. And we just can't afford to put all of our critical needs in this 6-year CIP. We have several schools that are in dire straits, but we can't do all of them, let alone preventative repairs. So what is your advice when it comes to triaging these critical repairs and when this preventative maintenance, which yes, might be more cost effective, but we have these critical needs now, how do we triage them effectively?
So you pretty much described it. It is a triage process. You would identify what critical functions have to continue, what investments have to be made to support those critical functions continuing. And yes, you will get a lot more long-term benefit out of deploying dollars on preventive maintenance. But if you can't afford it while you're keeping things open, you just do what you have to do to keep things open, and you shift bit by bit towards more preventive maintenance. Montgomery County Public Schools folks really do know what they need to do. They know what they're doing. They're knowledgeable. They're taking the right steps right now to take a backlog and figure out how to manage it with these constrained resources. They're absolutely moving in the right direction. Great partners, by the way. and they're going to get there, but it's going to take real additional effort from both the local and the state levels.
We have a question. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Mark Elrich. I'm the Montgomery County Executive. How you doing? Yeah, I'm trying to fit that into the budget, or at least as much as we can. I'll also say this comes after years of mismanagement by the schools, because they never asked for the stuff that was accumulating in a budget and thus were never turned down. And that's partly, it's a joint responsibility. The council never increased its bonding limits, and school systems understood they weren't going to get more than what the council said it was going to bond. And so they didn't ask for what they weren't going to get. I'm a big believer you ask for what you need, because then everybody's shocked at like a $2 billion price tag, and where the hell did that come from? But that wasn't my actual question. My question is, you talked about early childhood. Frankly, as far all the things in the blueprint, the only thing that makes a big difference in outcomes is early childhood. It is the most important thing you can do. Everything else is triage for kids who come to kindergarten unprepared. And I would rather invest my money, if I've got limited funds, on the front end of this problem rather than triage the back end, because as much as we triage, we lose more kids than we bring up. You can look at the data, no matter how much money we pour into it, these kids do not come to grade level by the time they leave high school. That's different when you start in the beginning. So I'm a big believer, if I had to focus my money, I'm focusing on early childhood. How much are you relying on the school system to provide the spaces? Because I thought this was supposed to be a partnership between schools and private providers, which is important because they provide the capital cost. They may need some renovation money for like a house or something they buy, which is way different than having to add building space. But the other thing is, if the school system takes off all of the 3- and 4-year-olds and leaves the infants and toddlers to private daycare, that whole system collapses, because the ratios for these little kids are so small that you're never going to get people to pay enough money to pay the staff that needs to take care of those kids. So whatever you do at the state has got to make sure you don't undermine the private providers, and we ought to be encouraging the providers. You've got standards for what they have to meet. You've got programs that can get people up to the level where they can provide these services. I really hope that you're aggressively planning on a partnership and not trying to load this all into the school system. I don't want to build more school space than I need when I've got the private providers who are willing to get space. So please be balanced in this.
Yeah, just a quick comment there. Thank you, County Executive. I have no arguments with your points about the value of pre-K whatsoever. The blueprint is something that is an operational programmatic side effort. The IAC is positioned to assist with school districts' capital and space side aspects of blueprint pre-K expansion. And we're working with the school districts that are bringing requests. If they don't bring requests, then the IC can't do anything. First. Second, private providers, an entirely different, separate world that we don't have any way to affect or touch, frankly. All we can do is support the school districts in what they decide to do to deliver pre-K services. And obviously, I would love personally to see pre-K expanded to reach more of the kids that need it, even if those numbers may be tapering off a little bit with the most recent enrollment decline that hit this fall of 11,000 students statewide drop from last year, particularly at the lower ages. That is throwing everybody for a loop. It's causing every school district to take a look at their projections and say, wait a minute, how many students are going to come at the different age groups? And how are we going to accommodate them? And how are we going to keep facilities available for each student and afford that? It is extremely complex. There's no silver bullet. And thank goodness the blueprint is not something that the IAC is a lead agency for, but we're going to continue to support the school districts every way we can on whatever it is they choose to do.
Hey, good morning. I'm Colonel Patrick Hawkins. I'm Chief of the Joint Staff of the Maryland National Guard. So first of all, I appreciate you coming and kind of explaining from your perspective. The gentleman here mentioned a couple of things. So we're working on a big problem set with Undersecretary of Defense, the governor's staff, et cetera, when it comes to critical infrastructure, but cyber warfare, et cetera. And you may think about critical infrastructure. Hey, we're talking about our power grids, the water plants, et cetera. But if we looked at what happened this past summer with the Maryland Transportation Authority getting hit, some of our adversaries are looking at those soft targets, whether that be within the state, et cetera. So one, the question to you, are we looking at the schools, the resiliency to cyber attacks, vulnerabilities, the hardening of the computer systems in the school? Because that's probably going to be something that we're going to have to experience, that we're working on the military side, as well as some of the state government entities on how we're going to approach that as the state of Maryland. And with that, if that is in your wheelhouse, and we are looking at that, but the Guard, we like to come with solutions. So we do have a very robust team on the Army and the air side, our cyber protection teams, our cyber squadrons, et cetera. And we did have the IRT, Innovative Readiness Training agreement with Anne Arundel County that we may go back and put back into place. But we have that capability to reach out into the schools, obviously working that through the state. So since we're the Maryland National Guard, we're state, to go into those schools and take an assessment, look at the hardening, look at your vulnerabilities and your weakness in those school systems. So I'd like your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Absolutely. And thank you for your service and your comments and questions. Cyber security is not within the IAC's wheelhouse. It is led by other state agencies. However, whenever school districts renovate or replace buildings, we do work to support them in putting in the hardware, right? We don't touch software, but we help them get the equipment in the facilities that they'll need to have for modern protections, and absolutely are there as a support agency for the school districts. There have been real challenges with attacks on school districts in the last few years, right? But that is not something the IAC has any real direct contact with. So I would just say I could try to help connect you with the right folks, but it's not my agency. But thank you.
Friends, it's going to close out our window for this morning. I want to leave you with one quick item. We sort of talked about school facilities, but also into some of the services that are in the blueprint, and I can't help but take this opportunity. The central squeeze at the local level in the blueprint right now is that when it was built in around 2018, even if you assume that every bit of work and every speculation and every tape that they ran to build out the blueprint in 2018, it was built on what it takes to do those things in 2018, to hire that bus driver, to hire that teacher, to build that facility, and to maintain and so forth. Everything was built and written into law based on 2018 guesses. The world has changed since 2018, but the state continues to say we're fully funding the blueprint based on those guesses. And that's why our school systems are having trouble filling the seats, hiring the teachers, delivering the services that are all part of the blueprint because the money hasn't followed. We're squeezed on pre-K in no small part because people haven't found it worthwhile to convert from daycare to being full instructors. The incentive's not strong enough, partially because it's antiquated, like everything else. All right, sorry for the sermon. A big round of applause for Alex Donahue joining us this morning. Thank you so much. It was really good.